Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. We have come to yet another end of the month, or beginning of a new one, I guess. So it's time to rank all my palettes for October. Almost in November then, but we are in November now. So ranking all my palettes for October. So I actually have quite a decent amount of palettes next to me. I think, if I remember correctly, it's like 13 palettes on the list, which is a good amount. And I do have some really good numbers on quite a few of them as well. So I'm excited to share with you the uses of my palettes. How I count it, if you are new to this kind of ranking series on my channel, is I take every single use in an eyeshadow as one use. So if I make a look with 5 shades in the palette, that is 5 uses. If I dip into one shade in combination with other palettes, so for example, like if I want to reach for a topper shade from a palette, that is 1 use. So instead of just looking at like the looks I make, I look at the amount of eyeshadows I use, and I feel like that's more fair, because a lot of times I just reach for like one shade if I have them, for example, in like Pandas eyeshadows or stuff like that. Whereas in like my Big Fat Eyeshadow project, or my, like if I do like more of a exclusive look with the palette, I obviously reach for the palette in more of a capacity. So that's why I decided to rank them that way. So I'm excited to share with you the palette that is top, as well as everything else. But before I do so, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. Let's jump into the video. Yes, I was right with the amount of palettes. We have 13 palettes to talk about, and for place 13 and 12, we have 2 palettes right here which have the same amount of uses, and that is 1 use each. So let's talk about them. The first one is my Club Nebula palette. This one I had in my Big Fat Eyeshadow project earlier this year, I think in the month of September. So I used this a lot then, but I did have one more use to go in my Expand Those Pan shade, which was this one here called Celestial, right? Yeah. So that one I used once in the past month, so that is the only use I got from this palette. And then the second palette with 1 use is my Gold Obsession palette from Huda Beauty. I'm currently trying to pan that mauve shade there on the side, and unfortunately I only reached for it once in the past month, but that is where that 1 use comes from. So for place number 11 and 10, we're also sharing the same amount of uses, and that is 2 uses. So we up 1 use, we double the amount of uses, but it's only 2 still. And the first palette out of those is this one right here, which is a Pat McGrath palette. So it looks very, you know, neutral. You don't know which one it is, but this one is my Pat McGrath Utopian Dreams palette, which looks like this. So the pan in here that I have used twice is this shade up in the corner. This one is called Astral Venusian Orchid, I believe, and that one is in my Pandas eyeshadows to use at least 15 times or pan. So yeah, that one I used twice. That is the only shade I used in here. I'm foreseeing that one to again pop up in my November ranking, because I haven't hit my usage goal on that shade yet. And then the second palette with 2 uses is my Yako palette from Natasha Nona. This is a new palette to me in my collection, but I had this one again in my Big Fat Eyeshadow project in the month of September. But I did have 2 shades left to go for No Plan Left Behind. I can't remember now which ones those were, because I used it very early in the month. But I did use those 2 shades to complete No Plan Left Behind on it, and that is again why I have only 2 uses on this palette. So we are again jumping up, and in place number 9 we have my Norvina palette from Anastasia. This one I have only reached for 1 shade again, and that one has been reached for 3 times. And the shade I'm talking about is the shade Volatile. Again, this palette was in my Big Fat Eyeshadow project, but I did have this shade in my Expand Those Pans, and I wanted to reach for that one 5 times in total. And in the past month I had 3 more uses to go, and I have completed that goal now, which is really exciting. It probably hasn't expanded too much. I know that was in Expand Those Pans, so I was hoping for it to expand, but I used it a lot on my lower lash lines. I used a very small amount every time, but I still have completed those 5 uses, and I have reached for it again 3 times in the month of October. Okay, so we're finally jumping quite a bit higher than those like 1, 2, 3 uses. The next palette comes in place number 8, and that is my Dreamy Palette. This one I have reached for 8 times in the past month. Again, I was reaching for this one in my Big Fat Eyeshadow project, and that is where a lot of the palettes come from, because I'm trying to complete all my palette in that project. So this one, I believe I did like 1 look in the month of October, 1 or 2 looks, I can't remember now, but I did use this one then. I also had the shade Inception in my Expand Those Pans, so that one has also been used. So that is the uses here, again 8 uses, so still not the best, but definitely higher than some of the other ones. And this is also the last palette that we have in single digits. So let's move on to the next palette, which comes in place number 7. And for the palette in place number 7, we have quite a small one. This is my Natasha Nona Mini Biba palette. This one was in my Big Fat Eyeshadow project in October, so that is why I have those uses, and that's why a lot of the other palette comes from is from that project or my product level up my palette. So it's a little heads up there. But this palette right here is one that I have used 10 times, so I'm really happy with that. It is obviously only 5 shades in here, so I'm really happy that I got some decent use out of this one. I know I'll use this shade in here in the middle a couple times. I think I used that one 3 times. I believe I also reached for like this one twice. This one, I believe I also reached for like once or twice. And then the deepest shade I think once, and then this one twice, I think. Something like that. I can't remember. I don't even know if that totals 10. But yeah, I reached for this one 10 times. It's a cute little palette. I thought that this was my least favorite Natasha Nona mini palette, but I did actually really like the 3 looks that I did with this palette, and I feel like it was quite versatile even though it only has 1 shimmer shade. So yeah, I really like it, but check out my Big Fat Eyeshadow project if you want to see my full thoughts on this one and the points of this one scoring at. In place number 6, we have another Pat McGrath palette. We have quite a few Pat McGrath palettes this month actually, but this one is the Midnight Sun palette, which is one that I received from one of my subscribers. I'm really grateful, Kriora, I think that's how you say your name. I'm really grateful for you sending this over again. Thank you again for sending it over and thinking of me, because I have really enjoyed this. It's actually the palette that I'm wearing on my eyes today. Just giving you a little sneak peek of one of my looks for my Big Fat Eyeshadow project. I feel like my eyes are smudged a little bit there. That's better. But yeah, this is the eyeshadow that I'm wearing today. I really do love this palette. I have made a couple looks with it. And in the past month, I have reached for this, well, in the month of October, I reached for this palette 12 times. I know that I reached for like this shade, the topper shade, quite a few times, and in the corner shade. And then I also dipped into the rest of the palette too. And again, I'm making 3 looks with this palette, so it's definitely going to show up again in the month of November. So we are reaching my top 5, and in place number 5, we have another Pat McGrath palette. I did tell you I have a few. This one is the last one though. But this right here is my Divine Rose 2 palette, which looks like this. This is also a palette that was in my Big Fat Eyeshadow project, and I made 3 looks with this palette, which is why it has a decent amount of uses. I reached for this one 13 times. I know I curated no pan left behind on this palette, so I reached for every single shade. And then I also reached for a couple shades more than once, of course. So yeah, that is this palette right here. I did really enjoy my looks with this one. And again, you can check out my update for that project if you want to hear more of my thoughts. In place number 4, we are jumping up quite a bit again with the uses. We have in place number 4 with 21 uses, my Natasha Nona Biba palette. So this is the full size Biba. It is a really stunning palette. I absolutely love this palette. And this is another one that I did my 3 looks with in my Big Fat Eyeshadow project, which is where most of those uses come from. Actually, I think that's where those 3 uses come from. So again, 21 uses, and it has 15 shades in it, and I reached for every single shade once. I did complete no pan left behind on this one. And I also reached for a couple shades more than once. I know for a fact that I reached for Monroe in all 3 looks. I also think I reached for a couple of shades twice. But again, check out my video, my Big Fat Eyeshadow project, if you want to see all of the uses. I do go through every single shade and how many times I use them all. But in total, it is 21 uses. So this one comes in place number 4. So the last palette that we have in place number 3 before we get into my top 2 is my Wilderness palette. And this one, again, it was in my Big Fat Eyeshadow project. I sound like a broken record mentioning that project all the time. But I do use those palettes quite a bit because I have to make those looks. And I do kind of like 1 week 1 palette with each palette. So yeah, this one comes in place number 3. And this one I have used 22 times. So just 1 more time than the Biba palette. This is a really stunning palette. It has quite a few shades. I think it's 20 shades in here. I have not quite yet reached no pan left behind on that. I'm going to try to do that in the month of November. So this one we're going to pop up in the next video too. But this palette, I have definitely used quite a few shades. This is the shade that was in my Expandos pans, and I have used that one 5 times. I also have the shade Eucalyptus in my Pandos eyeshadow, so that one I have reached for quite a few times as well. And then of course I did do 3 looks with the palette, so I had quite a few uses in those 3 looks. And that is kind of the summary for this palette. Again, this is definitely going to show up again in November. So in place number 2, we have one of my Anastasia palettes, and the palette that we have is my Sultry palette. So this one is my Product Level Up palette, if you aren't aware. I'm not going to show you what it looks like on the inside because I don't want to spoil anything. And I believe my Product Level Up update will be the next video going up, so you can see there what it looks like. But this is my Product Level Up level 1 palette, which means that I have to hit 1 pan and reach for every single shade at least one time. And with this palette, again, it comes in second place, and I have reached for it 32 times in the past month, which I'm really, really happy to see. It is now a more well-loved palette, of course, because I have reached for it 32 additional times, and that is going to be across a couple of different pans. But if you want to see that again, you can check out the update going up tomorrow with where I'm standing with this palette, but this one comes in place number 2. So because that one is in place number 2, I think most of you guys have probably already guessed what is in place number 1, and that is my Soft Glam palette. This one has such a high usage this month. There's a couple of reasons for that. I have obviously reached for this palette quite a bit on its own, but I did also finish a Franken highlighter with this palette. And what I do when I finish a Franken product like that is I actually count in all of the uses once I finish something up. So I did finish my Franken highlighter with glistening in it. So I think about 40 uses got added because of that. So that means that this palette has a whopping 105 uses. I know that a couple of those uses from that Franken highlighter came from the month before, but it's just easy for me to track it that way. But I still use that Franken highlighter, I think around like 30 uses in the month of October. So still most of those uses are actually in October as well. I'm not going to show you what this one looks like. I did post my update for this palette a couple of days ago, but I have actually Franken this, well, I have changed it a little bit since then. Actually, I can just show you, it doesn't really matter too much. I did use this one in my, what's it called, in my Franken and repressing video, which will be up later in the month. And the only thing really that changed is that I took out Fairy, which I mentioned I would do anyway in the update, and then I repressed Bronze. But otherwise, this palette looks the same, so I thought I could show you anyway. But yeah, this is a palette that comes in place number 1, and I have used it a whopping 105 times. So very, very happy with that. I'm super happy to see some more use in my palette. I had a couple months in the middle of the year, or it was like a couple months ago, like end of summer, where I was like slacking on this palette a little bit. I didn't use it too much. So I'm really glad to see that the uses are going up, and I'm excited to keep using this one and hopefully finish up as much as I can of this palette this year. So I'm seeing this one to stay top for the last couple of months of the year, but we'll see. And that, you guys, is going to be it for my October rankings. I am glad that I managed to reach for so many palettes, and again, a lot of them had some decent use. Obviously, we had the first like 5 that were like 3 uses or below, but then the rest of the palettes had a pretty like high usage for the ranking. I feel like a lot of times they stand around like 5, 6 maybe, but a lot of them had 10 or more uses. I had a couple that was even in the 20s, and then obviously my Level Up and my Planet Palettes had a lot of use too. But I'm gonna wrap up the video here. If you did like it, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I hope you guys are having an amazing day wherever you are, and I will catch you in my next one. Bye, guys.